So we are going to talk about very basic programming concepts. These are very, very important for you to understand to build on your understanding of any programming language. So these are very, very important for you to understand. These are more of theoretical concepts, but they would help you in build your programming understanding. Let's go through them, and I'm happy to answer any questions, so you can leave out a comment or reach out to me on Instagram. I'm happy to answer any of your questions. You can also book a session on thetrailmaker.com, and we can have a one-to-one discussion on any of your queries as well. Coming back to the basic programming concepts, so algorithm, in the most general sense, an algorithm is a series of instructions telling a computer how to transform certain information into a useful piece of information. The facts here are data, and the useful information is the knowledge for the people, instructions for machines, or input for yet another algorithm. So, algorithm is nothing else but a series of instructions which tells a computer do this, then do that. If this happens, do this, etc., etc. So that's what an algorithm basically means. This is very important for you to understand because in any of the programming language, you are going to use a lot of algorithms and understand, if this happens, then do this, otherwise do that. So that kind of understanding is an algorithm. Source code. Source code is the actual text that you construct in the language of your choice. So let's say you are writing a code in C++, you are writing a code in Java, JavaScript. So all of that is the source code which a developer has actually gone and written to do that particular function is called a source code. Compiler is basically a software program which comes with that language. So, if you're writing your code in Java, so you would have a Java compiler. If you're writing your code in C++, so you'll have a C++ compiler. It's the same way you would have a JavaScript compiler, a Python compiler. So what is the job of compiler? So if you remember from the previous topic, high level and low level languages, so compiler is something which converts the high level language into a low level language. So how does the CPU understand what needs to be done? So that's what compiler does and goes and explain to the CPU that this is what needs to be done. This is what X developers want you to do. So that's the job of compiler. Compiler also defines a way of writing in a particular language. In Java, you would write in a certain format. In C++, you would write in another format. Same way in Python, you would write in another format. How that format is defined, that format is defined by the compiler. Compiler is written, it basically understands that style of writing. So compiler, very basic and understanding, if I would say. So compiler is kind of the language basics. So like, in English, you would have the alphabets, then the vowels, then, the punctuation marks and all of that. So all that is defined in the compiler. So where a particular statement ends, what happens when that statement ends and all of that. So that is all written inside the compiler, and then compiler defines how you write your code to an extent. So it basically, as the definition says, it can further be executed using an interpreter to run the program. So right, that's basically the job of the compiler to that, it helps the computer to understand what basically needs to be done. Let's move on to the next bit, which is data type. So the first three which we were talking about were the concepts. Now we are coming to certain base layer topics which would exist in all of the programming languages. So any of the programming language that you'll pick up, they would have certain data types, they would have certain variables, and there would be a block of statement. Let's look at these, and then we understand what exactly each of these means. So data type. So data type is used in the application and can be of a different type. So it can be an integer, it can be a decimal, it can be a character. If we talk about C and Fortran and COBOL, so in those programming languages, we had only byte-sized data types, so like integer, decimal, and characters. So character is basically your A, B, A, B, C. So all of these alphabets could be a character. But as we moved ahead and as we reach C++, Java, Python, and all of that, you can now have strings as your data type. You can have floating, decimal points as your data types and all of that. So we have progressed. So Boolean is a data type, which is true and false. So all of these are data types which help you build your logic and how your code, and makes your code easier to understand and read by other developers as well as the system. A variable is a placeholder for that data type. So let's say you want to use integer A and integer B, and you want to sum integer A and integer B and return a decimal value as the addition. When you do that, we'll see in the following videos how we write this, but basically you'll define an integer and then give that integer a name. So let's say integer A is the name of that integer, and then similarly integer B, this A and B is the space holder to store an integer in the memory. The memory here we are talking about is the RAM memory, which we discussed some time back in the first videos. So A is a space allocated in RAM to store an integer. Similarly, B is a space in RAM allocated to store an integer. And same way, decimal C is a space allocated in RAM to store a decimal value. So now when we do C is equal to A plus B, that's going to store the sum of A and B in the memory of C. That's is the combination of a data type and a variable. You can't just say integer equal to 1. You can't do that. You have to say integer A is equal to 1. Any of the programming languages, that's how you do it. You define the data type, you give a variable name. So variable is basically because the value of this particular A can change. So right now you can give it 1 and then you can change it to 5 during the course of your program execution. So that's what a variable basically means. Then the next point here is the block of statement. A block of statement basically means is like you have 5 statements happening in your code. So then you create a block, couple of blocks within your code, which would happen like, this block can happen first, then this block, and then this block, or you can go from first to third and come back to the second, depending upon how you are writing your code and what is the logic between your code. But block of statement is basically to define that these set of statements should be run together, and then this set of statements should be run together. That's basically a block of statement. It helps in understanding for the code and the developer what exactly is happening together. It also makes the code very cleaner to read as well. So that's what block of statement is. It is generally in most of the programming languages, the block of statement is between two curly braces. So curly braces is something which you find generally on an English keyboard on the right of character P on your keyboard. So you use shift and put those curly braces there. Then we have conditionals. So conditionals in multiple programming languages are available, and condition is like something like if 1 is equal to 2, you can see on the screen. So 1 double equal to 2. So that's the way of writing a condition. We'll see how we write conditions when we reach out to actual program execution. But from a basic programming concept, in any programming you would have a data type, you would have a variable, you would have certain block of statements, and then you would have certain conditions. So let's say if A is greater than B, then do this. If B is greater than A, then do this. Something of that sort you are going to do in any of the programming languages to run your logic. And that's where conditional comes in. And there are a couple of ways you can put certain conditionals in each of the programming languages, and there are easier and some not so neat ways of putting conditions in each of the programming languages. So we'll, as we reach to Salesforce programming, we'll understand how we put those conditions in Salesforce and what are all options if we just do if and else, or we can do something else as well. There are a couple of options as well, but the most basic is if A is greater than B, then do this. Otherwise, if B is greater than A, then do this. These are kind of conditions that you put, and they are very, very important. So you need to understand how the conditions work, and they would help you build your logic very quickly and easily. The next topic, a collection. Collection is a variable where you store multiple values of the same data type. So for example, we were talking about a character. So we can store multiple characters together. So let's say we store A, B, C, D together. So that is a collection. Any programming language implements this. They implement it using an array or a list or a set and a map. So it is very important to understand what a array or a list is. And array dates back to the Fortran and C languages, and they are still in existence. And they are the base layer of any programming these days. Without an array, you cannot perform any of your actions. So what does an array basically mean? So array is a collection, a number of data types together, records of a particular data type together. So, like I said, A, B, C, D together, that's what an array is. And the list is just a different name given to it in Java and Salesforce. So, in Java and Salesforce, you don't call it an array, you call it a list. Same way, a set is an extension or a step ahead from an array, which basically just stores unique values. So let's say if in your list you put A, B, B, C, D, then in a set, if you put A, B, B, C, D, the set will only return you A, B, C, D, but the list will return you A, B, B, C, D. So that is the difference between a list and a set. A map is the combination of two then. So map is basically called a key pair value. So in a map, you would have a key and then a value against it. So the key section is the set and the value section is the list, right? We'll understand that when we start writing code, but for now, just understand the concept, list, set, and map. We would use all of these very thoroughly in Salesforce. So it is very important that you understand these concepts. List is a way of storing multiple values of a given type together. Set only stores unique values, and then map stores multiple values as a key pair. So key pair basically means, and when I say set against a value is, so key is, let's say, take it in a roll number format. So roll number so one is the key here, and the roll number one could be the trail maker. Two is the another key here, which is your roll number, and that student could be Himanshu Gupta. Same way, three could be another person, XYZ, and so on and so forth. So your 1, 2, 3 is a unique number. If you put another one and say Salesforce, so then Trailmaker would be replaced by Salesforce. So instead of a one Trailmaker, you would find one Salesforce now. So that's the concept. So that's why I say map basically implements both set and list together. Don't get confused right now if you are not understanding it. When we start writing the code, you will understand it. I'm intentionally not bringing up the developer console at the moment because I want to explain that in detail how the developer console looks like. But for the time being, just understand the concept of storing multiple values together. That's the only concept here. We'll understand set and map if you're getting confused in the further videos down the line. Let's move on to the next topic. Then we have string. So strings is again a collection of characters together. So let's say string basically means, so string in Salesforce and in Java is a data type. Instead of storing character array, so like a character array could be like, let's say if you say dog is running, so that could be a character array where in a character array you would store D at a certain place, then O at a certain place, and then G at a certain place, and so on. Whereas in a string, you would just say string variable, let's say you just say str. So string str is equal to dog is running, and that's it. So it is that simple. Basically, at the backend, at the compiler level, it still implements the original method of character array, but in as a high level language, it makes it easier for us as humans to write that code. Then a very important thing is loop. So loop helps you iterate through certain iteration basically means that you keep on running inside this and based until a certain condition is true, and the moment that condition is true you come out of it. So it's kind of you go in a giant wheel and then giant wheel keeps on running and running and running until it does, let's say, 10 rounds, and the moment the 10 round is done you come out of that giant loop. So that's what exactly the loop does. There are multiple ways of writing a loop in a programming language. In Salesforce, we use another way of writing that loop, which we'll understand in the following videos. Another very important topic is functions. So function is a piece of code which you can reuse. So let's say you have written a code which is of, let's say, 50 lines of code, but you want to use something which you are using repeatedly in that code, right? So then what you can do is take those 4 or 5 lines out of that 50 line and write it somewhere, and then just use the function at multiple places. So that's can reuse those 5 lines again and again, and you don't need to copy and paste. So let's say in case you want to change those something in those 5 lines, then you can just go and quickly change in that one single place where you have written that function, and then at all of those places where you have calling that function, that particular change would be implemented. So it makes it easier for you as a developer to maintain your code, and you can easily make those changes as and when the requirement change. And trust me, requirements is quite often in real life scenarios. So when you start writing your code, it should always be very scalable and maintainable. So anybody can go and change the, few things and then, implement the new logic. That's how good developers write the code. Next point is classes. So until the programming languages developed, we didn't have classes, but with coming of object-oriented languages, the concept of classes came into being. And so what exactly a class is? So class is a template that contains the state and the behavior which corresponds to the programming is field and method. So basically, in a class, what the definition says is, this is quite deep definition, but I'll explain it to you in simpler terms. So a class basically means it says a set of data type, and then what action can be performed on this particular set of data type, right? So class can have a combination of data types, so like integer, string. So let's say student is a class. So then student, roll number, first name, last name. So that combined together is a class. So remember, I was explaining in how high level languages work, how object oriented programming languages work. So they combine all of this data together, and then you start writing your actions which can be performed on this combined data. So like you can, insert data, you can update this data, you can print this data. So all of this can be done using the methods or the functions that you write within this class for this particular set of data. So the class is the data set together, combined together is the data set, and then you do actions on that data. If you understand it, good. If you don't understand it, when we start writing the code, you'll get a hang of it. So don't worry. Moving on to the next. Okay, I think the basic programming concepts until class, I've tried to, compress them a lot. Otherwise, these are like, month-long topics just to understand what exactly these are. But in a gist, this is what it is. If you have further questions or have certain doubt on these, reach out to me on trailmaker.com. We'll in the next videos, we'll start working on Salesforce in the Salesforce Developer Console, and we'll start writing real-time code. So please watch the next video if you have any of these questions or doubts on any of these topics. They will be answered as we go through development, real life development in the upcoming videos. So keep watching and see you in the next video. If you have any questions, you can join the QA session, which happens every Friday. And please drop in your comments, feedback, and any questions in the comment section, and I'll get back to you.